So Iggy, you just kind of described in the arrangements when you're kind of working up towards the deal about how critical the alignment is between the goals, the intention, and you talked a lot about kind of almost the culture of the organizations and how well they match. You talked about kind of steady Eddie versus high growth, and to me, when you describe that, it kind of speaks to the culture of the organization. Because I found that when you do build a high growth team, when you build a culture of kind of let's get to that next milestone, let's keep everything rolling, let's build momentum, can be quite different from you described steady Eddie. So can you kind of talk a little more about the culture and the things you look for in culture and what kind of significance it has?
Every company has a culture, whether the management team is intentional about creating that culture, that may not always exist. And if they are, if the management team is intentional about creating a culture, then they have a good chance of the culture ending up the way that they want it to. And it won't always get there. But if it's management's intent to create a culture of really long working hours, but the company being your family and people there till midnight, they can do that, and they lead by example, and then that kind of happens. Right. If the management wants to create a culture of very family-based, regular hours, super flexible, they can do that, and they can think about that. If they want to create a culture of fun, they can do that. But sometimes we've seen in some companies where the management teams aren't intentional about the culture. They just they show up to work. They got their jobs. They each have their roles. They do those, and then the culture just kind of happens. And it sometimes there's a few loud people in the company, and they start leading some things, and all of a sudden that's your culture, and it just sort of shows up, and it's just created. So I think before we even get to what a buyer looks for, I just think it's important generally for management teams and owners to be intentional about their culture. Whatever it is that you want as an owner, and I think most cultures can be good cultures, as long as you're not creating a really toxic culture, whether it's a super hardworking, late hours culture, much more family balance, a little bit more fun, a little bit more serious and corporate. All of those are okay cultures, and it's the management and owner's job to create those. I think it's their job to create them intentionally. And so now you've got a culture. Whether you wanted it to be there or not, you have one, and your company is known by your culture. Right. So how does that fit with a buyer? And in my opinion, if you're being acquired by a strategic buyer, so where you're going to be absorbed into that company and become a part of that company, right, then I think cultural fit is important. Then it has to be aligned. If you're a company where the owner has young kids and has in turn really put that throughout the organization, saying that we are ultra flexible on things. Friday afternoons, get out of here. If it's a nice day, go out there. I know you'll get the work done. Like we're here. We're a big family. We need to get our work done. But like if you're not here 40 hours, that's okay. And if you're acquired by a company that expects its employees to routinely work 70, 80 hours a week, that's going to be a problem.
Yeah.
And there's a good chance you will lose all of your people in that transaction, and all the value that the buyer paid for will just disintegrate into nothing, and all the people as the owner that you cared about will lose their jobs, and that wouldn't be a great thing, I don't think. So if you're being acquired by a strategic and the companies are blending together, I really think it's important that you spend time understanding the buyers and the sellers' culture and make sure that they're at least somewhat aligned so that there's not these major problems that happen later on.
A lot of the business owners that I talk to, we talk about culture, they seem to get nervous. They kind of go, well, culture is one of those airy-fairy, feely, touchy things. They have a hard time defining almost. Yeah. It's somewhat nebulous.
And it is, but that's absolutely nebulous.
Well, I think to me, it's how we describe it. Yeah. Because I reframe it for them, and quite often it's transformational. I say, and this isn't my words, this is from somebody way smarter than me, culture is simply the behaviors you tolerate. That's your culture. So I don't care what words you've got on the wall. I don't care what you say your core values are, and all of that mission statements and all that other stuff. Culture at the end of the day is the behaviors you tolerate. And when you think of it that way, then I think that makes it, to me, easier for us to be intentional on our culture. Yeah. Because it's interesting, because when you describe the cultures, you describe really patterns of behavior. End of the week, I get all my work done, but I'm not in the office 12 hours a day. I might be working 2 o'clock in the morning at home after my kids are in bed, but I'm getting stuff done, those kind of things. So I think there's, I think there's how you look at it and how you help them kind of think about being intentional on that culture, I think is so critical. What are some other things that you think they can proactively do? So the culture piece is one. What about things like, a lot of business owners, so much of the business is in their heads. So much of their patterns or behaviors are just habitual. From that perspective, what do you think kind of some of the other areas like processes and systems and other things like that kind of get it out and beyond the owner? What do you advise around some of those types of things?
I think processes are very important. But let's first talk about just the owner having everything in their head. And if the owner has everything in their head, then they can't leave the business, at least not anytime soon. Yep. And that usually becomes fairly obvious in the due diligence process, how much the owner has just in their head.
Right.
And that can be a problem. If the owner has the intention on leaving, that could be a deal breaker. And that brings us back to making sure that there's that good second in command. Yeah. And and if the owner has everything in their head, but the second in command also has it all in their head, and then they've got some good people around them, maybe it's okay. But absolutely, documenting some things definitely helps. But some things you can't really document. You can't document relationships or how I sell this thing, or you can't document a lot of those things. You can't document how the owner creates a culture in the office. So those are I guess you could, but they'd be very difficult and almost pointless, I think, to document. So I think the processes for the operations side of the business, absolutely critical. But for the softer side of the business, the sales, the culture, that is the behaviors you tolerate, and you have to be comfortable with those in the business that you're buying.
So in terms of process, systems, tools, quite often, I see those as being real keys to companies that, in particular, are either in growth. How do you scale? Because if you don't have processes and tools, sometimes it's hard to scale and deliver consistent product, consistent service, those kind of things. And then the other aspect is how do you set yourselves up for success, I guess, in a way, is kind of one of the ways I think of it when I think of systems and tools and things. High performance, high operational excellence companies, I find, tend to have, if they're entrepreneurial, it's maybe not absolutely written in stone, because they want to be agile, and that's another big factor these days. But they do have, here's our way of doing it. And it's understood, and the next guy's, we hire another guy, he does it the same way, so our clients know what to expect, et cetera, et cetera. On the operational excellence side, what do you think, how do those things fit, and how critical is it for business owners to deliver those if they're just kind of implied at this point?
Well, yeah, processes, and they are important, and a few times I've heard a rule that a company should have anywhere between 50 and 100 processes.
Oh, interesting.
For everything, and that's from HR to manufacturing to everything, and right. And so as an owner, if you look at your company and you have between 50 and 100 processes for all the different things, and you add them all up and there's 70, you probably got a good handle on the processes. Right. If you've got 300, you've probably gone overboard, and a lot of them probably aren't being followed. And if you've got 10, then maybe you don't have enough. So that's been a guideline that we've used in some of our companies just to see where we're sitting in the number of processes. And I mean, it's just a rule of thumb. And so it's a bit of a guess, but that's been pretty effective for us.
Right.
If we have between 50 and 100, that's pretty good.
Do you find that almost like your kind of seconds and having capability in the leadership team, do you find that culture of accountability, let's call it, if it is there, does it add more value from your perspective, and how attractive or how the risk is reduced for your acquisition? And if you don't see it, is again this something that you feel you have to kind of bring to the acquisition yourselves?
The question of accountability is a tricky one during an acquisition, because it's kind of hard to see. You're usually speaking only with the owner, or maybe the owner and a few people. And I don't know of any owner or manager that in a sales process would put up their hand and say, you know what, we've just got an issue with accountability around here. Yeah. So that doesn't happen. So you don't really figure that out until you've bought the company, whether there's an issue of accountability. But with all that said, I think companies that have a good, strong sense of accountability perform better. Yeah. So as the owner, if you're able to get that sense of accountability into your company before you sell it, the earnings will be higher and you'll get paid more and you'll have a better exit.
Well, actually, it kind of begs the question then, in your experience and observation, the high-performing, high-growth companies that you've purchased or come across, do they tend to have a culture of accountability? Is that kind of common within the ones that are high growth?
Yeah. So we've bought companies that were high growth, and the management team was definitely a high accountability team, and they called each other out on things, and if they missed targets, they were all hard on each other and really hard on themselves. And that's a key trait that we've seen a lot. The management team is really hard on themselves, and you almost don't even have to beat them up about missing some kind of number, because they've already beat themselves up way worse than you can beat them up. Yeah. And those are the companies that have continued to grow fast. There's I think of one particular company that we bought that didn't really have that really great culture of accountability, and we bought them a long time ago, and they've been pretty stagnant ever since.
But I find, from my own experience at least, is that when the CEO or only a few people in the organization are the nexus of accountability. They're the only ones holding everyone accountable. I find those, if I'm going to transform a company, it's getting the team to take over that responsibility, getting the team to recognize that if they truly care and support each other, they owe this to each other. It's not blameability, it's about coachability. It's about being there to support each other, to perform at the best we can be. And I find that quite often is the key to the transformation, is getting people to function effectively as a team, to make that a we thing, not a, oh, he's going to jump on us again, I'd better get my report in. Yeah. So in your own company, how does that fit for you guys? Because you guys have been fast growth for as long as I've seen you.
Yeah, as long as I've been there, we've been a fast growth company. And we were fortunate that as we've been buying these companies, there have been great leaders in place who love growing. And so that helps. But I think also, if you have a plan for growth as a leader in a company, you have to share that plan, and ideally develop that plan with your management team. Okay. And together say, hey, where do we want to be here? Where do we want to be in 5 or 10 years? And what is usually ultimately that there's some kind of statement around that. Yeah. We want to be the most trusted this, or the best this, or the number 1 in this market, or the number 2 in this market. And then usually that's accompanied by some kind of number. And then that means 50 million in revenue by 2025 or something like that. And usually most leaders in a company, the CEO or the president or the owner, they'll have that number in their head already. Yep. And then it's if they get together with their management team and kind of coach their management team towards coming up with that number and that statement on their own, then they're in a really good place. And now you've got a team who it's their idea, and even though they were a little bit coached, but it's their idea where they want to go. And now it's not just it's not just the boss saying, "Hey, where's the next number? I wanted you to get this done." Now it's a team, and they're accountable to each other.
Well, and kind of to extend on that a little bit, when I look at the Toyota principle and lean and stuff, they do take it right down to the tool face, to the worker level. Mm-hmm. But it's empowering people not to set strategy, but how can they play a key role in executing the strategy? What's their contribution towards that shared objective, that shared goal, that kind of thing? You talked about the owner has to have their goal, their objective, their vision for themselves personally. Mm-hmm. How does that contrast, or maybe it does, maybe it doesn't? How does that fit vis-a-vis the team's vision, the team's goal, where the organization as a whole wants to go? How do those two have to balance against each other?
But I think they have to be pretty closely linked. I mean, if you're the chief decision maker in the company, and your personal goals are at odds with the company's goals, that's a problem. Right. So I think they have to be lined up, but they don't always have to be the same. I mean, if the company's goal is to be the number one in this market, but the owner knows that 3 years from now, they want to exit the company, right. You can work towards both goals.
Those aren't opposed.
Even though they're quite different.
Yeah.
So I think they have to be lined up, but they don't have to be the same thing.
Right. Because the owner knows they've got an off ramp. Yeah. But I know where I've had the best successes with companies I've worked with quite often is when we transform the organization so the team is really carrying 99% of the balls.
Yeah. Well, that's as a leader, that's what you'd want. As an owner, that's what you'd want, so that ultimately it doesn't all fall on your shoulders. I think one of the areas where owners can sometimes have a conflict on their goals and the company's goals, mm-hmm. is if they know that 2 or 3 years from now they want to sell, and their company is a growth company. Well, growth costs money.
Yep.
And so how do I maximize a profit? Because ultimately a company's value is a multiple of the profit usually. And so if I got this growing company and I know I'm going to sell it in 2 or 3 years, maybe I start really trimming the expenses down to bring the profit up so that I can get the maximum possible amount for it. And that can be a conflict, right? I got this growing company, our goal is to be the number one in this particular market. That's going to take investment and effort, but I'm going to sell the company, so I'm going to start laying people off, or I'm going to not actively go towards that goal anymore. And that can be a challenge. And it's a very, very delicate balancing act, because in a transaction, usually the two levers of final purchase price are the earnings and then a multiple of the earnings.
Right.
And in a fast growth company, often you'll get a higher multiple because there's more excitement, and the future is better, so you get a little bit more of a multiple and the earnings might be lower just because you are investing in growth. And if a company is a much more steady state company, you'll get a lower multiple because they already know that the profit's been maximized and there's not that much upside.
There's not the upside.
So I think it's a tricky balance for owners to balance that, because if you're selling 2 years from now and you start cutting down on the expenses, the buyer might notice that and decide that maybe your company is not worth 5 times earnings, now it's worth 4 times, or whatever the number is that they're deciding to pay. So it's a delicate balance. And if I was looking from the outside in, if I was talking to an owner who was selling their business and they say, "What do?" I would say, whatever your big vision and your purpose is, just keep doing that, and then find the right buyer that wants a company that's going there, and then you'll get the maximum value for your company.
Well, it's interesting because this is one where I've seen radically different valuation processes, procedures. I've had a number of tech businesses Well, in the tech sector, we never make money.
Oh yeah, tech is totally different. I'm talking more of the boring kind of product and service businesses where there's usually a multiple of the profit. Tech companies, that is a whole new ball game, and that's just get your revenue as high as you can and tell an awesome story.
It's usually, if anything, it's always a multiple of gross revenue, or recurring revenue, or some different metric. I'm curious, do you think there's potential to start bringing some of the young entrepreneurs who are thinking this new technology stuff and kind of bringing those things together in terms of creating future potential value?
I really do think there is a lot of future potential value in companies like that. There's a lot of old, boring companies out there that sell simple products and simple services. And there is, I think, a massive opportunity to layer on top of that some kind of IoT or AI or big data layer that absolutely exists.
Yep.
And I think as a business owner that's selling one of those older, more boring businesses, if you can just identify where those opportunities are and put those on a nice silver platter for a potential acquirer, and say, hey, I've grown the business like this. It's been simple. There's room for something a little bit more complex here. I'm not going to do it, but there's some upside there. That could be worth something.
Excellent. Good. That makes me feel good, because I've been telling, our clients that this is something they really need to consider, because a lot of them really do know, they know their industries, they know their businesses so well, they know their customers' needs so well. And sometimes it's just getting them to think a little bigger. Think about, because you can't open up a newspaper, you can't read a blog spot without reading AI, IoT, VR, AR, all of these tech, little phrases.
And those are big scary words and scary acronyms for people that don't live in that world.
Yeah.
And I think often you need someone who can really think big picture about it. But there's also a lot of little opportunities to use those technologies. And just a little example, in one of our companies, it's a piece of oil pumping equipment. And we usually will send a technician to site to go start these things up. The unit was sold in Colombia, and this was during COVID. So no Canadian is going to Colombia. It's just not happening.
Right.
And so we use augmented reality to do a virtual startup, which we had never done before. And it's a complex piece of equipment. It took us 5 days of augmented reality time from our base in Calgary, and we did it. And that wasn't, a massive project that required us to change a company, but it was us using, one of those key new upcoming technologies to allow us to do something that we couldn't do in the past, and we'll do it again. And so I think picking your battles in some of those little areas is a really great way for owners who are not that comfortable with that technology. Just pick little things.
But you did point out, though, if they can identify some of those opportunities, that's worth something.
Absolutely. And that's I think that is a really good opportunity for owners who are looking to sell. If you're not a very highly technological company, and you're planning on selling in 2 to 3 years, you're not going to become a highly technological company in 2 or 3 years. If you've got 20 or 30 years of being just a bare bones sales company that sells some widgets or does some kind of services, it's not likely to happen.
One of the things I've advised a couple clients of mine is the government has funding for new grads. And you can go find, especially these days, as an oversupply, you can go find some really bright young talent with, engineers, computer science, various areas that have got kind of some of the latest awareness and training on the latest technologies. And if you can bring somebody like that in, who's not core to your business, but if you can do it on 25-cent dollars, sometimes those can bring real opportunities to you. So any thoughts on that? Have you seen anybody take on that kind of an initiative?
Well, there's an incredible amount of support for entrepreneurs and for businesses, especially who those who want to do these new kind of technological things. A ridiculous amount of support. And you don't really know how much support there is until you start peeling back the layers of the onion and start looking online. There is, we mapped out some of them, and we stopped at about 200 organizations in Alberta that have money available for these kind of things. So there is a lot available. And yeah, so we've seen a bunch of companies take advantage of it. It takes time. Like there's applications to fill out and grant forms to fill out, but the amount of money out there is significant, and it ranges from R&D dollars to, as you said, salary dollars. And there's a lot out there. And sometimes there's just help. There's organizations out there that will give you a coach and help you prototype things and do things for you for free. And it's pretty spectacular what Alberta has built in their innovation and entrepreneurship ecosystem. It's really incredible.
Yeah. Well, and it's not just the government either. Ironically, we had a conversation today with the IoT Association. Yeah. And, again, a group of kind of business leaders and businesses that are just peer supporting each other. Yep. So reaching out and connecting to even some of those types of things. But again, the big challenge I find with meat and potatoes working businesses is what gets resourced gets done. Yeah. Who's going to take the time or who's going to find somebody and assign somebody who can take the time and explore those things? Yeah. Do you think it's worth doing? Where vis-a-vis relative to kind of the deal, do you think they should start thinking about this type of stuff?
If you're planning to sell your company, you got to be starting that process at least a couple of years before. Otherwise, the only thing that you're coming with to the table is an idea. You won't. Yeah. Otherwise, you're saying, "Hey, we have this brick and mortar product, and we know there's some grants available to add technology onto it." That's really not worth much. You need to suss it out a little bit and actually maybe get some of the money and have a young student at 25 cent dollars doing some of the work for you, and actually have something that you can show.
Maybe a prototype, maybe and to me, this is where companies kind of get entrepreneurial again. The key I found is always having that first real customer who's willing to say, "Oh, if you're going to build that new widget, we'd like to go on that little journey with you. That we're interested in that."
Yeah, absolutely. Having market pull, not just we've learned that a few times where we thought we had a really, really great idea, and then we put a bunch of money and time into it, and then showed it to the customer, and they said, "Oh, that's really great, but there's this other thing out there that does the exact same thing for half the price. So sorry." Wow. And that hurt.
But nowadays the trend now is really that, and I've seen you do, with this, to have the courage to experiment, to take risks, to step out there, and even for business owners, when you're looking at your exit, you can kind of take the safe road, and that's probably going to give you a value at one point, or you can look to kind of reboot your entrepreneurial engine, and that may give you a different value, but it's got risks associated with it.
I would say that the risks are actually quite low. So if you're the owner and you're interested in this, you could peel off 10% of your time and go search these things, or you could assign some person 25% of their time to go search out these things, go find some grants and go research some things. And it's pretty cheap to do, actually. It's not like you need to hire a department of data scientists to go figure out if you can add this offering. I think it's a pretty low risk proposition, actually, to go figure out if adding technology to your brick and mortar business makes sense. Yeah. And there's a lot of resources out there that can help. And even the Canadian Shred credit, that's just designed to have companies try stuff and fail. No matter what you're trying, just try it. And if you fail, you can write it all off and get a bunch of money back from the government. There's some pretty cool grants out there that allow you to try things. And even if you fail miserably, you still get the money.
Well, and it de-risks it to the point where it takes a big part of the fear factor away.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Excellent. So in terms of today,
we covered a lot of ground.
I really wanted to thank you, because for me, we did cover a lot of ground. But I found every piece that you shared, there were some real nuggets in there that for me personally, kind of validated some of my thinking, but made me look at things a little bit differently and stuff. And to me, every day I learn something's a good day. So today's been a great day.
I really enjoyed it. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.